Hello, fellow humans. A study in Nature Climate Change found that the personal carbon footprint of the rich is widely underestimated by both the rich and the poor. Over 4,000 people from 4 countries were surveyed. Each dot in the diagram represents one person. The real average footprint, measured in tons of CO2 per person per year, is represented by the red dot. The vast majority of participants across the 4 countries overestimated the average personal carbon footprint of the poorest 50% and underestimated those of the richest 10% and 1%. People were asked to estimate the average personal carbon footprint specific to 3 income groups: the bottom 50%, the top 10%, and the top 1% of income within their country. Participants from the top 10% income segment perceive the actual carbon footprint inequality as significantly fairer than those from the general population, except in India. Is this because humans living in Denmark and the USA believe the inequality is fair, that they deserve their lifestyle? The dots are more spread out in India and Nigeria due to lack of knowledge about the real data. Who has time to find out about inequalities in carbon emissions when you have to put food on the table every day, when you don't have a working internet connection, when you don't know about the World Inequality Database? It's good to know that carbon emissions in rich countries sustain a very consumerist culture, sometimes described as an imperial mode of living, which suggests that people's everyday practices as well as identities rely heavily on unlimited confiscation of resources, a disproportionate claim on ecosystems and sinks, and cheap labor from poorer countries. The reality of emissions in the 4 countries studied is very bleak. The top 1% of the population, by income, emits on average from 15 times to 30 times more than the bottom 50%. The target for emissions is close to 0 tons by 2050 if you want to slow down the climate crisis. 0 tons, not 269, which are the emissions of the top 1% of Americans. So we don't know as a society the enormous gap between the rich and the poor. If everyone knew, the revolution would start today. Another study shows how Americans have no idea which behavior cuts emissions the most, or which companies are the worst emitters in an industry. Researchers found evidence that people tend to judge climate actions they hear about most often as being the most effective at reducing emissions. In fact, the opposite is the case. If you live in America, you can test your own carbon competence in this short survey about climate-friendly behaviors. What is the fairest climate policy of all? Let the poor emit a bit more and make the rich emit much less. Rich countries should pay climate reparations, roughly $200 trillion. Luxury carbon taxes on things like private jets, yachts, SUVs, and other oil-thirsty habits. A super progressive taxation scheme where the richer you are, the more taxes you pay. Debt forgiveness for the poor countries. Dear Danes and Americans, you can too live simpler and avoid an imperial mode of living. Individual actions won't do it, I'm afraid. This is a systemic problem. If you see your neighbor driving a stupid Cybertruck, or an F-150 or a Hummer, you won't feel much motivation to take your bike to your local Costco. Just like we banned ozone-depleting substances, we can also start banning all the crazy stuff that warms the planet, destroys habits, and makes life hell for future generations. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, please hit the subscribe button so others can see this stuff. As always, there are links below for everything I said. Support me on Patreon if you can, it helps a lot. I'm trying to do these educational videos for a living, but I don't want to indulge advertisers. Until next time, be well and increase the peace.
Sometimes you eat the bar and sometimes,